I watched from the east terrace, hands still dark with soil, as my ex-wife Diane stepped through the cedar pergola. She moved the way she always did at events, chin up, smile rehearsed, scanning for whoever mattered most. She stopped at the Boulder. The bronze letters caught the last of the golden hour light, designed and built by Wesley Tiernan. Beside it, the framed county deed, her name on neither. The smile locked. Her grip on her clutch shifted. 25 guests had already walked past the Boulder. One moment, please subscribe and comment where you're watching from. Your presence here truly matters. My name is Wesley Tiernan. I build gardens. I graduated Virginia Tech's landscape architecture program at 23, top of my class, with a professor's note in my file that said I had an instinctive understanding of terrain that can't be taught. I didn't know what to do with that at the time. Turns out, neither did anyone else in my life. My first real job was at Cahill and Associates in Richmond, a firm that designed public gardens and park restorations for municipalities across Virginia. David Cahill, the founder, was in his late 50s with silver hair and ink stains on his shirt cuffs that never came out. He hired me on a Tuesday and handed me a site survey on Wednesday. Most of my guys look at a slope and see a problem, he said, tapping the topographic lines on the survey. You look at a slope and see a staircase. That's rare. Don't lose it. I spent 3 years at that firm. My second project flooded during a 100-year storm. Cahill drove out to the site, looked at the water, looked at me. Fix it, he said. I did. After that, he gave me bigger projects every 6 months. Community parks, waterfront restorations, a memorial garden for a county courthouse. I won a regional design award for a park restoration in Henrico County, a project where I'd rebuilt the drainage system by hand after the contractor quit mid-job. Cahill stood next to me at the ceremony, hands in his pockets. "You're the best young designer I've trained," he said, not in a speech, just to me, walking back to the car. I met Diane at a charity gala in Richmond when I was 26. Black tie event for a children's hospital. I was there because Cahill had donated a garden design and needed someone to represent the firm. I wore a borrowed suit that didn't fit right across the shoulders. Diane found me standing near the bar studying the event planner's landscaping through the window. She was 25, blonde, with a jawline that could cut glass, wearing a green dress the same shade as the boxwoods I was critiquing. "You're the only person at this party looking at the bushes," she said. "They're boxwoods, and they're planted too close together." She laughed, not a polite laugh, a real one. At the bar, she reached for my hand and turned it over, running a thumb across the calluses. Soil ground into the creases no amount of scrubbing could remove. She held it longer than she needed to. Every other man at that gala wore his suit like armor. I wore mine like a costume, and my hands gave me away. We married 18 months later. She organized our weekends into color-coded calendars. I kept the herb garden on the kitchen windowsill alive. It worked. The shift started in year 2. Small things first. A dinner party at her colleague's house where someone asked Diane what her husband did. "He's a landscape architect," she said. "Oh, so like mowing lawns." Diane smiled and changed the subject. In the car afterward, she was quiet for 10 minutes. Then she said, "I just wish people understood what you do." I told her it didn't matter what people understood. It mattered to her. By year 3, the size had started. A friend's husband made partner at a law firm. Another friend's husband closed a deal in commercial real estate. Diane would come home from these conversations and look at me across the kitchen table with something I couldn't name at first. Disappointment, maybe, or embarrassment that she was working to disguise. One night, she set a printed job listing on the counter next to my dinner plate. Facilities Manager, Meridian Pharmaceuticals. The salary was 40% higher than what Cahill paid me. Benefits package. Stability. It's not about the money, she said. It's about building something solid for us. For our future. For when we have kids. I looked at the listing. Gray office building on the company website. Fluorescent lights in every photo. Not a window that opened in the entire facility. This isn't what I do, I said. It's what adults do, Wesley. They provide. I took the job. Told myself it was temporary. Told myself I'd find a way back. I was wrong on both counts. My first day at Meridian, something closed in my chest. Not panic, something slower. A door shutting from the wrong side. 14 years. I spent 14 years in that building. I managed HVAC systems, parking lot, repaving schedules, elevator maintenance contracts. I supervised janitors and negotiated with vending machine suppliers. I once spent 3 weeks negotiating the placement of a hand sanitizer dispenser outside the second-floor men's room. Every morning, I put on khakis and a polo with the Meridian logo and clipped a badge to my belt that said Facilities Management in block letters. The building smelled like carpet cleaner and recycled air. The community gardens smelled like turned earth and tomato leaves. My sketchbooks gathered dust. For months at a time, I wouldn't open one. The hand that used to draw loose watercolor studies of wild ferns and Japanese maples now signed purchase orders for floor wax. Saturday mornings were the only hours that counted. I volunteered at community gardens across the county, showing up at 7 with my own tools, planting beds, amending soil, teaching neighborhood kids how to grow tomatoes from seed. I filled notebooks 7 through 11 during those years. Watercolor studies done on park benches and garden walls, quick and loose, the only art I had time for. Diane found notebook 9 on the kitchen counter one Sunday. "What is this?" she asked, flipping through the pages. "Sketches. From the garden this morning." She closed it and set it down. "You spend every Saturday morning doodling in a park?" "It's not doodling. Wesley, our son Connor, has a soccer game at 10. You missed it last week for this." I stopped bringing the notebooks home after that. Kept them in my truck, in a cardboard box behind the passenger seat. Over 12 months, I spent $2,400 on plant specimens and design reference books. Japanese maples from a specialty nursery in Oregon. A signed first edition of Thomas Church's Gardens Are for People. Reference volumes on sustainable irrigation design. I kept them on a shelf in the spare bedroom Diane used for storage. She found the receipts in February. I know the month because our son Connor had just turned 18, and there was a birthday card from me still taped to the fridge. $2,400, she said, standing in the kitchen doorway with a stack of credit card statements in her hand, on plants and books about plants. Over a year. That's $200 a month. $200 a month on a hobby you do in a public park. It's not a hobby. Then what is it? I didn't answer because the honest answer was, it's who I am. And that answer would have started a conversation neither of us was ready for. She called her lawyer that afternoon. I know because the call showed up on our shared phone bill. 47 minutes to a family law practice in town. The papers came 6 weeks later. A process server in a brown corduroy jacket walked into the Meridian Facilities Management office on a Tuesday morning at 9:15 and handed me an envelope in front of 3 coworkers and my supervisor. Diane had filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences, with a supporting affidavit that mentioned financial irresponsibility and failure to prioritize family obligations. $2,400 over 12 months. $200 a month. That was her definition of financial irresponsibility. That was the number that ended my marriage. The settlement stripped me clean. Diane kept the 4-bedroom colonial, the house my corporate salary had mortgaged for 14 years. She got half my retirement savings. Connor was 18. Legally, custody didn't apply anymore. But he chose to stay with his mother through college, and that told me everything I needed to know. Our social circle, every couple we'd known, every neighbor, every dinner party friend went with her. Not because they chose sides, because she was the one who stayed in the house, in the neighborhood, in the story she was already writing about what happened. I kept my truck, my tools, my field notebooks, and what was left of my savings after the lawyers finished. I moved into a 1-bedroom apartment on the east side of town. $800 a month. Linoleum floors, secondhand furniture, a refrigerator that hummed too loud at night. I put one photo on the fridge, Connor at his high school graduation, cap crooked, grinning. Held it with a magnet from a pizza place. Diane would later tell people the apartment was proof I couldn't take care of myself. She didn't understand that I'd chosen it. Every dollar I didn't spend on rent was a dollar I could spend on something else. I took a consulting position with a small landscape firm. Residential gardens, park renovation proposals, nothing glamorous. But I was drawing again, reading terrain again, talking to soil again. My friend Phil Trask, a master plumber I'd met through a community garden project years earlier, started coming around on weekends. Phil was 46, stocky, with a handshake that could crack walnuts. First time we met, he'd looked at my Meridian polo and said, "You don't belong in that shirt." He was the only friend who didn't disappear after the divorce. "You need a project," Phil said one Saturday, standing in my apartment kitchen with a beer. "I need land," I said. We started driving around on weekends between my consulting jobs, looking at properties. Phil had the plumber's eye for infrastructure. I had the designer's eye for potential. 6 months after the divorce, I found it. 3 acres on the edge of town, past the last subdivision, down a gravel access road that dead-ended at a chain-link fence. The parcel was overgrown with invasive honeysuckle and wild grape. 2 collapsed-out buildings. A drainage ditch choked with sediment. Every developer in the county had passed on it. The asking price was a fraction of what cleared land sold for. But the soil was deep. Loamy, well-drained, slightly acidic. The slope ran south-southeast, catching morning and afternoon light. A natural spring fed the drainage ditch. The canopy gaps were spaced right for understory planting. Someone had cleared selectively 50 years ago, and nature had done the rest. I could see terraces in the hillside. I could see paths in the tree line. I could see what this ground wanted to become. I bought it with what remained of my savings. The deed was recorded at the county office that Thursday. That evening, I drove out alone, parked on the gravel, climbed the fence because I hadn't gotten a key for the gate yet, walked the property as the sun dropped behind the ridge. I crouched at the base of an old oak that had survived decades of neglect and pressed my hands into the earth. Soil under my fingernails. Dark, cool, full of worms and root threads and the smell of rain, 3 days gone. The first time in 14 years. I sat there until the light was almost gone. Then I opened a fresh notebook, number 12, and started sketching the existing trees by what was left of the dusk. The first year after the divorce, I heard things. Secondhand, thirdhand. The way you hear about weather in a town you don't live in anymore? Phil told me about the brunch. He'd heard it from a plumber on his crew whose wife ran in Diane's circle. She told Margot, "Your apartment is so small she feels sorry for you," Phil said, Diane's older sister. He was standing in my kitchen, which was, in fact, small. Beer in one hand, the other balled at his side. Margot told 3 people before the check came. I didn't respond. I was reviewing a site plan for a community park renovation in Henrico County, my first decent consulting contract. "You're not going to say anything?" Phil asked. "About what?" "About your ex-wife telling everyone you're a charity case." I set the site plan down. "Phil, what would I say, and who would I say it to?" He opened his mouth, closed it, drank his beer. That was February. By April, the narrative had grown legs. A mutual friend named Greg Hollis, an insurance adjuster who'd been at our wedding, ran into me at a hardware store buying landscape fabric and irrigation fittings. He looked at me the way you look at a dog tied to a parking meter. "How you holding up, Wes?" he asked. The question had weight behind it, the kind that comes preloaded with someone else's version of your life. "Good? Busy." He nodded too many times. "That's good. That's real good. Diane mentioned you've been having a rough stretch. Did she?" He glanced at the landscape fabric in my cart. "Well, hang in there." I knew what he'd report back. Wesley looked tired. Buying cheap supplies at a hardware store on a Tuesday afternoon. Rough stretch confirmed. What he didn't know was that I was buying materials for the drainage system behind a retaining wall I'd designed in Notebook 12. A system that would manage 600 cubic yards of hillside runoff and protect the first terrace of a garden that would take years to finish. But that's not the story he was equipped to tell. Diane didn't need to lie. She never said Wesley is a failure. She said, "I just worry about him." She never said he's broke. She said, "That apartment, it's fine. I'm sure it's fine for him." She never said he's useless. She sighed and changed the subject, which let everyone else fill in the word. Patty Vickers, Diane's college friend who laughed at everything Diane said and never once asked whether any of it was true, hosted a dinner party that spring. Phil's plumber heard about it from his wife. Patty had asked Diane how Wesley was doing. Diane shook her head, slow and sad. "He can barely keep a plant alive," she said. Patty laughed. The table laughed. The story traveled. By the second year, her version was the only version. At a neighborhood block party I wasn't invited to, 2 couples who'd known us both for a decade nodded along as Diane positioned herself at the center of the table, wine glass in hand, doing what she did best. "I carried everything," she told them. "The house, the bills, Connor's school stuff, everything. And I don't say that to be cruel, I say it because that's what happened." Phil's plumber heard this one too. The network was reliable. Nobody drove to my apartment to see the drafting table covered in blueprints. Nobody asked why a man with a landscape architecture degree from Virginia Tech was buying Japanese maples from specialty nurseries. They didn't need to ask. They already had the answer Diane gave them. Connor came home from Virginia Tech after his freshman year. We had dinner at a chain restaurant off the highway, a booth by the window with laminated menus and a television playing sports highlights above the bar. He looked older, broader across the shoulders. He ordered a burger and didn't make eye contact for the first 3 minutes. "How's the semester?" I asked. "Good. Civil engineering's a lot of work." "You like it?" "Yeah." "Mom says it's a good field." "Mom says." Two words that told me everything about whose voice was in his head. We ate. He talked about a professor. I asked about his roommate. The conversation had the shape of an interview, polite and careful, with both of us aware of the clock. "I've been working on something," I said, setting my fork down. "A project outside town. 3 acres. I'd like to show you sometime." He looked at me. His eyes moved to the window, then back. He said nothing for a moment. "Yeah, sure, maybe over break." Break came and went. He texted the morning we'd planned to go. "Can't make it. Study group for structures exam." "Sorry." I typed back, "No problem. Good luck on the exam." 3 months later, I asked again. "Saturday morning," I said. "I'll pick you up." He called the night before. "Hey, Dad. Tomorrow's not going to work. Margot's having a thing and Mom wants me there." Margot's having a thing. Diane's older sister pulling Connor into the orbit where every adult in the room knew exactly one version of his father. I didn't argue. I didn't ask a third time. She didn't turn Connor against me with a single conversation or a dramatic revelation. She did it with scheduling, with proximity, with the simple mathematics of a young man living in his mother's house, surrounded by his mother's friends, absorbing his mother's certainty every day for years until it became his own. Connor graduated from Virginia Tech with a degree in civil engineering on a Saturday in May. The ceremony was outdoors. White folding chairs on a manicured lawn, 300 families packed together in the heat. I arrived early, found a seat 3 rows behind Diane's group. She sat in the second row with Margot and Patty Vickers. They wore matching sunglasses and carried programs they didn't read. Connor walked across the stage. I clapped. Diane's section clapped louder. Afterward, Connor found his mother first, as he should have. I stood at the edge of the crowd. He spotted me, waved, mouthed something that might have been, "Thanks for coming." Then Margot pulled him toward a photographer, and the moment dissolved. I drove home, stopped at the garden on the way, walked the south path I'd finished grading the previous weekend. The retaining walls were holding 40 tons of reclaimed stone from a demolished church in Spotsylvania County, each piece fitted without mortar, leveled with a torpedo level and the kind of patience that corporate facilities management had never asked of me. That was year 4. By then, the garden had its bones. The terraces descended the hillside in clean lines. Phil had helped me install the recirculating irrigation system, 3 weekends of trench work and pipe fitting, his payment a case of beer, and the satisfaction of solving a pressure differential problem that kept him talking for a month. I'd sourced specimen trees from nurseries on 3 continents. The Japanese maple from that Oregon nursery, grown from a sapling I'd found pushing through a crack in a parking garage in Richmond 8 years earlier. A monkey puzzle tree from a Chilean supplier who shipped it in a crate lined with damp moss, its sharp-scaled branches like nothing else in Virginia. An African tulip tree that needed a cold frame for its first 2 winters until it hardened off, its waxy leaves catching light like green leather. Each one planted with soil amendments I'd tested and retested, staked, mulched, checked weekly. A stonemason named Ray Gutierrez, a friend of Phil's, spent 2 weekends helping me set the stone terrace at the living wall site. A welder named Kemp fabricated the curved steel armature for the living wall itself, 24 feet tall, shaped to follow the hillside's natural curve. They came because Phil asked. They stayed because the work was good and the beer was cold, and none of them had any use for Diane's version of who I was. I filled notebooks 12 through 17 during those years. The way light hit a new leaf at 7 in the morning versus 4 in the afternoon. Color first, detail second. Loose brushwork, quick studies done on stone walls and garden benches. The kind of work Diane had called doodling. Year 5, a consulting project I'd done for a public park in Fredericksburg caught the attention of the State Botanical Society. They sent their president, a woman named Renee Okafor, a former university professor who'd spent 30 years studying sustainable landscape design. She contacted me about the park project first, asked technical questions about the native plantings I'd specified. Then she asked if I had any private work she could visit. I drove her to the 3 acres on a Thursday morning in October. The maples were turning. The living wall had filled in enough that you could see the design intention, ferns and mosses and flowering jasmine layered in graduated tiers against the steel armature. Renee walked the paths without speaking for 20 minutes. She stopped at the waterfall, watched the water move over the reclaimed stone. She crouched at a planting bed and examined the soil structure. She stood beneath the monkey puzzle tree and looked up through its canopy for a long time. "This is serious work," she said. "The water management alone, the living wall. I'd like to write about it for the quarterly journal. It reaches every landscape professional and botanical institution in the region." "I appreciate that," I said. I looked at the garden. The wisteria arbor I'd built the previous spring still hadn't bloomed. 3 years of waiting on that vine. "Not yet," I said. "It's not ready." Renee studied me. She had the patience of someone who'd spent decades watching things grow. She nodded once. "When it's ready," she said, "call me." I gave her my word and drove her back to her car. That December, Phil called me on a Wednesday night. His voice had the tight edge it got when he was keeping himself from shouting. "I need to tell you something," he said, "and you're not going to like it." "Go ahead." "Carl from my crew was at Margot's holiday dinner last week. Your ex was there. 8-10 people at the table. I waited. She told a story about you. Said when you two were married, she bought you a houseplant as a gift. A fern. Said you killed it within a week. Couldn't even keep one plant alive." Everybody laughed. I sat on the couch. The apartment was quiet except for the pipes. "Wes," Phil said, "you hearing me? She's telling people you can't keep a plant alive. You, the guy who built a goddamn botanical garden from nothing. I heard you, and?" "And what, Phil?" I could hear him pacing, boot heels on a hard floor. "Say something. Tell people what you've been doing out there. 6 years, Wes. 6 years of your life in that ground, and she's telling people you killed a fern. Nobody who matters believes her," I said. "Everybody believes her. That's the problem." I thanked him and hung up. I drove to the garden. It was past 10, cold enough to see my breath. I parked on the gravel and walked the main path by flashlight, checking the irrigation lines the way I always did. Checking the stone joints, the mulch depth, the new growth pushing through the leaf litter. The Japanese maple stood at the center of the south terrace, 30 feet tall now. The trunk had thickened into something that looked like it had been there for decades. Not the 3 years since I planted it. The canopy spread wide and dark against the winter sky, bare branches reaching in every direction, each one grown from a sapling that started in a crack in concrete. I sat on the stone bench beneath it and opened notebook 17 to a blank page. Started sketching the maple's winter silhouette by flashlight, the branches against the sky, the stone wall behind it, The garden quiet, except for the sound of water moving through the irrigation lines Phil and I had laid 3 summers ago. A fern. She told them I killed a fern. I finished the sketch, closed the notebook, and drove home. Connor called on a Thursday evening. I was at the drafting table in my workshop, working on a drainage plan for a residential client in Fredericksburg, when my phone lit up on the bench. The workshop smelled like cedar shavings and linseed oil. The pencil made a soft click against the drafting table when I set it down. Dad, hey, Aunt Margot's doing the barbecue thing again. Saturday. Margot's annual late summer gathering. The same backyard, the same gas grill, the same 20 people who hadn't spoken to me since the divorce. I'd stopped being invited 3 years ago. Connor, I don't think I'm asking you to come. His voice was different, not the polite, careful tone from our chain restaurant dinners. Something underneath it that sounded like effort. Lily wants to meet you. For real, not just a wave across a parking lot. Lily Newen, Connor's girlfriend of 2 years. A UX designer he'd met at a college friend's wedding. I'd seen her once, at a distance, when I dropped off a birthday gift at Connor's apartment and they were leaving for dinner. She'd waved. I'd waved back. That was the extent of it. Your mother will be there, I said. I know. I looked at the drainage plan on the table. The residential client's backyard had a slope problem I'd solved with a French drain system and 2 catch basins. Clean problem, clean solution. Saturday, I said. What time? I pulled into Margot's subdivision at 4:15. Ranch houses with matching mailboxes, driveways sealed the same shade of charcoal, lawns mowed to identical height. I parked my truck at the curb 3 houses down because Margot's driveway was already full. I wore what I always wore. Henley in a faded olive. Work boots I'd resoled twice. My father's field watch on its worn leather band, the crystal scratched from decades of contact with stone and bark and soil. 20 people in the backyard. Folding tables covered in paper plates and plastic cups. A gas grill sending smoke into a sky the color of a washed-out work shirt. Kids running through a sprinkler in the side yard. The smell of charcoal lighter fluid and cut grass. Diane stood near the grill with a glass of white wine, Margot on her left, Patty Vickers on her right. The formation hadn't changed in 6 years. Diane wore a linen blouse and white pants, sunglasses pushed up into her highlighted hair. She saw me come through the side gate and her chin lifted 1/2 inch. Nothing else moved in her face. Phil was already there, standing near the back fence with a bottle of beer, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. He'd come because I'd told him I was coming, and Phil Trask didn't let friends walk into hostile territory alone. I crossed the yard to him. We shook hands. Retaining wall, Phil said, not missing a beat. The one for the Fredericksburg client. You decide on dry stack or mortared joints? Dry stack. The grade won't hold mortar through a freeze-thaw cycle. That's what I figured. You want me out there next weekend for the footer? We talked stonework. Behind us, the party continued. I heard Diane's laugh carry across the lawn, the practiced one she used when performing for more than 4 people. Connor and Lily sat at a folding table near the patio, paper plates in front of them. Lily was smaller than I'd expected. Dark hair pulled back, a plain white t-shirt, no jewelry except a thin gold chain. She sat angled toward the yard, watching people move around Diane the way I studied a site before I drew a single line. 10 minutes after I arrived, Diane was talking to a neighbor named Karen, a woman I vaguely remembered from a block party years ago. Their chairs were angled away from me, but not far enough. Diane's voice carried the way it always did. Wesley's still in that little apartment. You know the one. She sipped her wine. I worry about him honestly, but what can you do? Karen glanced in my direction. I didn't look back. Phil's jaw tightened around the mouth of his beer bottle. 20 minutes later, Margot stood up from her chair and stretched, looking at no one in particular but speaking loud enough for the near half of the yard. Some people just never figure it out, she said, shaking her head. People have. You know, you give them every chance and they just… She trailed off and sat back down. Phil set his beer on the fence post. I'm going to say something. No, you're not, Wes. Phil. He picked his beer back up, drank, said nothing. I stood near that fence for another half hour. Talked to Phil about irrigation valves and pipe diameters. Nursed a beer I didn't want. Watched the party happen around me the way weather happens around a fence post. Lily, from her folding table, watched me, not staring, just looking at something she hadn't expected to see. The sun dropped behind the roofline of Margot's house. The string lights came on. Diane had finished her second glass of Sancerre, and someone had poured her a third. Her gestures were wider now, her voice louder. Patty laughed at something I didn't hear. Then Diane stood up, set her glass on the arm of her chair. The ice shifted against the rim, and she walked across the yard toward me. The distance from the grill to the back fence was maybe 30 feet. She covered it in no hurry, heels clicking on the patio stones and then going silent on the grass. 15 people had a clear sightline. Phil straightened beside me. Wesley, she said, not a greeting. An announcement. Diane. She crossed her arms and tilted her head, the same tilt she used to give me across the kitchen table when I'd done something she needed to correct. Her eyes were bright from the wine, 2 high spots of color on her cheekbones. I was just telling Karen about the time I bought you that fern, she said. Her voice carried past me, past Phil, past the fence, projected to the yard. Remember that cute little Boston fern I brought home? You killed it in a week. She laughed. 1 week, Wesley. Patty's laugh cracked open from across the patio. High and sharp. Margot shook her head with her mouth turned down, the picture of sympathetic exhaustion. You can't even keep a plant alive, Diane said. That's always been you. Everything you touch just… She waved her hand, a gesture that took in my boots, my truck, my apartment, my life. Dies. 3 neighbors smiled the way people smile when they're uncomfortable but won't intervene. Connor sat 6 feet away at the folding table. His fork stopped moving. He didn't look up. The yard was quiet. Cicadas, the sprinkler. Patty's laughter fading into a grin. I looked at Diane. Her jaw was set, her chin up, her shoulders squared in a posture she'd practiced for years. She was waiting for me to crumble, to argue, to give her the reaction that would confirm everything she'd spent 6 years telling people about the man she left. I held her eyes. My jaw tightened. The muscles in my forearms tensed against nothing. I'm not going to argue about who I am, I said. I set my beer on the fence post beside Phil's empty, turned to him. He gripped my shoulder once, hard, his hand the size of a catcher's mitt, and said nothing because he knew what I'd built in silence and what it cost me to leave it there, unspoken. Thanks for coming out, Phil. I walked across the yard, past the folding tables, past the grill, through the side gate to the front yard where my truck sat at the curb under a maple that someone had planted too close to the sidewalk. Its roots were already cracking the concrete. Give it 10 years, and the whole section would need replacing. But nobody here would notice that. Nobody here knew how to read a tree. I didn't rush. Didn't look back. My boots were steady on the driveway pavement, and my shoulders were straight, and I climbed into my truck and pulled the door shut and sat for a moment with my hands on the wheel. My son watched his father leave. That was the cost. I started the engine and drove home. Connor didn't follow. I learned what happened next weeks later when Lily told me herself. That night in the apartment Connor shared with Lily on the second floor of a converted Victorian near his engineering firm, Lily sat on the couch with her phone. Connor was in the kitchen, opening a beer, not talking about the barbecue the way you don't talk about a car accident you just walked away from. She typed Wesley Tiernan, landscape architect, into the search bar. The third result was a feature article from the State Botanical Society's quarterly journal, published 6 months earlier. She tapped it. The photographs loaded first. A 3-acre garden carved into a Virginia hillside. Stone terraces descending in clean lines. A waterfall built from reclaimed church stone, water catching the light as it moved over the surface. Specimen trees from 3 continents, their canopies layered against a blue sky. And at the center of the largest photograph, a 2-story living wall of ferns and mosses and flowering jasmine trained over a curved steel armature that followed the land's natural contour. The caption read, "Wesley Tiernan's private botanical garden, designed and constructed over 6 years by the landscape architect himself." The article quoted René Okafor, president of the State Botanical Society, calling the garden one of the finest examples of sustainable landscape design in the region. It described the water management system, the soil amendments, the native plant integration. It mentioned that Tiernan had sourced specimen trees from nurseries on 3 continents and built every retaining wall by hand. She stood up and walked to the kitchen doorway. Connor, he looked up from his beer. She held out her phone, said nothing. Connor took it. His eyes moved across the screen. The terraces, the waterfall, the living wall. His father's name in the caption, in the article text, in the institutional endorsement of a woman whose title was president. He stared at the phone for a full minute. His thumb didn't scroll. His eyes didn't move. Connor's truck was parked on the gravel access road when I came around the bend. I recognized it from the parking lot exchange 2 months earlier, the birthday gift drop-off where his girlfriend waved and I waved back, and that was the full extent of our contact. Silver Honda Ridgeline, engineering firm sticker on the rear window. He backed in the way I'd taught him to park when he was 16, always face the exit. The driver's seat was empty. He was already inside. I'd been at the East Beds since 7 that morning, dividing hostas that had overgrown their borders. My hands were black to the wrists. Soil caked under every nail, ground into the creases of my knuckles, the way they used to look before 14 years of desk work scrubbed them clean. I had a flat of divided root clumps in the wheelbarrow and a pair of bypass pruners in my back pocket. I set the wheelbarrow down at the edge of the path and walked toward the main garden. He'd come through the Cedar Pergola entrance. I could tell because the gate was unlatched, left open the way a visitor would leave it, not the way I closed it every morning. The boulder beside the entrance still caught the light the way it did every afternoon, the bronze letters facing the path. Designed and built by Wesley Tiernan. Below them, the State Botanical Society seal. The framed county property deed hung on the post beside it, my name as sole owner of every acre he was standing on. I'd mounted it there the week after the article came out, when René suggested the garden deserved a proper entrance. He'd walked past all of it. Read every word, or he hadn't. Either way, he was here. He was standing in front of the living wall, 24 feet of curved steel armature rising above him, layered with ferns and mosses and jasmine vines that had taken 2 full growing seasons to establish. The jasmine was blooming. White flowers against green. The scent carried on still air. Connor stood with his hands at his sides. He wasn't taking photos. He wasn't looking at his phone. He was just standing there, head tilted back, looking up the way people look at something they can't fit into what they already know. I came around the stone terrace and stopped mid-step. My boots scraped on the flagstone and he turned. Recognition. Then something that looked like the start of speech. Then nothing. His mouth closed. His eyes moved from my face to my hands, the soil, the pruners, the Henley with a torn seam at the collar. He looked at me the way I look at a site plan that contradicts the survey data. "Hey," he said, "hey." The living wall ticked behind us. Irrigation drip lines releasing water at timed intervals, a sound like a slow clock. I wiped my hands on my jeans, which accomplished nothing. The soil was past the point of casual removal. I pulled the pruners from my back pocket and set them on the stone cap of the retaining wall. Connor looked at the garden behind me, the south terrace descending the hillside, the stone paths, the canopy of the Japanese maple 30 feet above the lower beds. A cardinal moved through the upper branches, a flash of red against green. "How long?" he said. Not a question with an upward lilt. A flat statement waiting for a number. 6 years since right after. He didn't need me to finish the sentence. 6 years, he said. He looked at the living wall again, then at the ground, then at his own shoes, which were clean white sneakers that had never touched garden soil. "Why didn't you tell me?" I'd rehearsed answers for years. Long speeches, full of evidence and timelines. None of that came out. Would you have believed me? Connor's jaw worked. He looked away toward the waterfall where water moved over reclaimed stone and caught the midday sun. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. We both knew. I picked up the pruners again because my hands needed something to hold. "Come on," I said. "I'll show you." We started at the lower terrace. Native perennial beds bordered by hand-cut stone edging, black-eyed Susan, coneflower, blue cardinal flower. I pointed out the drainage system beneath the path. The French drains Phil and I had trenched 3 summers ago. "Phil Trask," I said, "my plumber friend. He helped me design the water management. Took us 3 weekends to lay the pipe." "The guy from the barbecue," Connor said. "That's the one." We walked the stone path to the waterfall. Phil had solved the pressure problem with a gravity-fed recirculation loop that moved water from a holding tank at the top of the hill through 60 feet of streambed lined with river stones, over the waterfall face, and into a catch basin that pumped it back up. The stone was reclaimed from a demolished church in Spotsylvania County, each piece selected for its weathering pattern and color. "Where'd you learn to do this?" Connor asked. "Virginia Tech," Cahill's firm. 14 years of not doing it. I adjusted a stone at the waterfall's edge that had shifted from last week's rain. "Turns out, you don't forget. You just wait." We climbed the south terrace to the Japanese maple. Connor stopped beneath it and looked up through the canopy, the way Renee Okafor had, the way everyone did when they stood under that tree for the first time. "I found it growing through a crack in a parking garage in Richmond," I said, 8 years ago. A sapling, maybe 2 feet tall, pushing up through 4 inches of concrete. Everybody said it wouldn't survive transplanting. The root ball was wrapped around rebar. 30 feet, Connor said. He was looking at the trunk, the way it had thickened. 30 feet now, from a crack in a parking garage. I rested my hand on the bark, rough under my palm, warm from the sun. Some things just need to get out of the concrete. We walked the upper terraces. I showed him the monkey puzzle tree from Chile, its sharp-scaled branches catching light at angles no Virginia native could match. The African tulip tree that had needed a cold frame for 2 winters before it hardened off. Each one planted in soil I'd tested and amended by hand. Connor stopped talking. He just walked and looked. His sneakers collected mud on the soles, and he didn't wipe them. The wisteria arbor was blooming. 3 years I'd waited for those clusters of purple flowers. 3 years of nothing but leaves and woody growth, while I trained the vine over the cedar frame and told Phil it would bloom when it was ready and not before. Now it hung in curtains above the path, the scent heavy in the still air. 3 years, I said. 3 years of nothing. Then one morning I walked out and there it was. Connor reached up and touched a cluster. His thumb pressed the petals flat. He pulled his hand back, said nothing. We drove back to the apartment in my truck. He didn't talk. Gravel popped under the tires, and the wind came through the open windows, and neither of us tried to fill the silence. I took him to the workshop. The space behind my apartment building was a converted storage room, 12 by 20, with a greenhouse addition Phil had framed out one weekend. Propagation trays lined the greenhouse benches. Specimen plants in various stages of growth filled every flat surface. The workshop side smelled like pencil shavings and damp soil from the propagation trays. Connor stood in the doorway. His eyes moved across the room. The drafting table first, covered in hand-drawn blueprints and elevation drawings, garden plans rendered in pencil and colored ink. The Fredericksburg client's retaining wall, a park renovation for a county in the Shenandoah. 2 residential projects I was bidding on, then the corkboard. I watched his face as he read the clippings. A design award from the Regional Landscape Architecture Association. A half-page feature in a trade magazine about the Henrico County Park restoration. The Botanical Society article Lily had found online, printed and pinned beside a letter from Renee Okafor requesting permission to photograph the garden for the Society's archives. Connor's hand came up to touch the edge of the magazine clipping. He pulled it back without removing the pin. "When was this?" he asked, pointing to the award certificate. 3 years ago. 3 years. He'd been in college. I'd been winning design awards and building a garden and filling notebooks with watercolor studies while he ate dinner at Margot's table and listened to his mother tell people I couldn't keep a fern alive. Then he saw the notebooks, 11 of them on a shelf beside the drafting table, arranged in order. Battered Moleskine-style covers, some water-stained, some cracked at the spine. Notebooks 7 through 17 from the community garden years through the property build. He pulled one from the middle of the row. Number 14. Opened it to a random page. A watercolor study of a hosta leaf. Loose, fast brushwork. 3 shades of green laid wet on wet, the veins suggested rather than drawn. Light hitting the surface from the upper left. Not botanical illustration. Something looser, more personal. He turned the page. A Japanese maple in autumn. Red and gold bleeding into each other at the edges. The trunk rendered in 4 strokes of raw sienna. His thumb pressed the page flat. Another page, a moss-covered stone wall. Another, a cluster of jasmine flowers against steel. Connor turned pages the way you turn pages when you're not reading. When you're recalculating. He set the notebook back on the shelf and looked at me. "Mom said you doodled." I know what she said. This isn't doodling. No, he pulled out notebook 12, the first one from the garden, opened it to the initial sketch, the one I'd drawn by the last of the dusk on the day I bought the property. Existing trees mapped in quick pencil strokes. The slope of the hillside rendered in contour lines. Notes in my handwriting along the margins: soil 5.8, good drainage aspect, spring fed. Existing oak keep. Clear honeysuckle by March. The date in the upper right corner, 6 years ago. 3 months after the divorce papers were served on a Tuesday morning in front of 3 coworkers. Connor closed the notebook and held it in both hands. He looked at the corkboard, the drafting table, the shelves of notebooks, the greenhouse full of specimen plants. Then he looked at me. His expression shifted the way a structure shifts when you realize the foundation is wrong. Not the careful politeness from our chain restaurant dinners. Not the distance of his graduation wave. Something behind it that was still settling, still finding its new level. He set the notebook back on the shelf. "I want to have the engagement party here," he said. I hadn't expected that. I'd expected questions, maybe an apology, maybe the awkward handshake of a young man who doesn't know how to bridge 6 years in an afternoon. Not this. "Here," I said, "at the garden." I looked at the greenhouse, the propagation trays, the drafting table. Through the window, I could see the edge of the living wall above the tree line, the steel armature catching the afternoon sun. I said nothing for a long time, long enough that Connor shifted his weight from one foot to the other, long enough that the greenhouse irrigation clicked on and off again. "You sure about that?" I said. "Your mother will be there." Connor looked at me. His jaw set the way mine did. Same bone structure, same angle. "That's kind of the point," he said. This looked like a decision. "All right," I said. "When?" He told me the date. "Late September, 6 weeks out." Then he paused in the doorway, one hand on the frame. "One more thing. That woman from the Botanical Society, the one who wrote the article. Renee Okafor. You have her number?" "I do." "I'd like to invite her. She's been holding some kind of award for you. I think she should bring it." I studied his face. 24 years old. Civil engineer. A man now, not the boy who sat 6 feet from his mother at a barbecue and didn't speak up. "I'll give you her number," I said. Connor nodded once and walked to his truck. His white sneakers left muddy prints on the gravel. He didn't look down at them. I stood in the workshop doorway and watched him drive out. Then I looked at my hands. Soil black in every crease, ground under every nail. The same hands that had signed purchase orders for floor wax for 14 years. The same hands that had planted a sapling from a crack in concrete and waited for it to become a tree. I picked up a pencil and went back to the drafting table. The first guests came through the pergola at 6:15. The sun sat low on the ridge, throwing long gold light across the stone terraces and turning the waterfall into something that looked like it belonged in a painting nobody would believe was real. I stood near the east path with a glass of water, watching them enter. Clean Henley, pressed khakis, boots I'd resoled twice, my father's field watch on its worn leather band. Not a suit. I don't perform. A couple in their 30s, friends of Connor's from college, passed under the wisteria, which was hanging in full bloom. Purple clusters so thick the pergola looked like a living ceiling. The woman stopped walking. Her hand found her husband's arm. "Oh my God," she said. Her husband looked past the pergola to the garden below, the stone terraces descending the hillside. The specimen trees in full canopy. The living wall glowing in the early light, 24 feet of ferns and mosses and jasmine against the curved steel armature. They walked to the boulder. Read the bronze letters. Designed and built by Wesley Tiernan, the State Botanical Society seal beneath. The framed county property deed on the post beside it, my name as sole owner. The husband turned to his wife. "Did you know about this?" She shook her head. They moved down the main path, still looking. Behind them, 2 more guests came through the pergola and stopped at the same boulder. This happened 25 times in the next 40 minutes. I'd spent the morning setting up. Round tables with white linen arranged among the plantings. The raw bar near the waterfall where the sound of moving water would fill the gaps in conversation. Charcuterie near the wisteria arbor. A small cleared area near the living wall where Renee would stand later. String lights threaded through the tree canopy overhead, not turned on yet, waiting for the sun to drop. Phil arrived at 5:30 in a clean flannel shirt, which, for Phil, was black tie. He carried a case of beer to the portable bar near the waterfall and cracked one open before setting the rest down. "You nervous?" he asked. "No, liar. I adjusted a table setting that didn't need adjusting. The napkin was already straight. I moved it a quarter inch and put it back." Phil watched me and said nothing. He'd been watching me for 6 years. He knew what this evening meant, and he knew I wouldn't say it out loud. Connor and Lily arrived at 6. Connor wore a navy blazer over a white shirt. Lily wore a green dress and had her hair down. They walked the main path together, Connor pointing out features to Lily the way I'd pointed them out to him weeks earlier. The Japanese maple, the monkey puzzle tree, the drainage system hidden under the flagstone. Lily stopped at the wisteria arbor and looked up through the purple curtain of blossoms. 3 years, she said to Connor. 3 years before it bloomed. Nothing, then everything. She looked at me across the terrace. Smiled, said nothing else. She didn't need to. The paths filled, 28 guests by my count, moving through the garden in small groups, glasses in hand, voices carrying in the warm air. I heard the same question from 6 different conversations. Who designed this? Is this a botanical garden? How much does something like this cost? 3 people I hadn't spoken to in years introduced themselves as though we'd never met. Karen, the neighbor from the block party who'd heard Diane's version of my apartment. A man named David whose wife played tennis with Margot. A woman named Susan who'd been at our wedding and hadn't called since the divorce. Each of them shook my hand and looked at my face with an expression I recognized from site surveys. Recalculating the data, "Wesley, this is incredible," Karen said. "I had no idea. Thank you. How long have you been doing this?" 6 years. Her mouth opened, closed. She looked at the living wall behind me, then back at my face. She was doing the math. 6 years. The same 6 years she'd spent hearing about my sad little apartment. I excused myself and checked the raw bar. The oysters were fine. The shrimp was cold. Everything was where it should be. At 6:45, 3 women came through the pergola. I was near the waterfall, refilling the ice bucket at the bar when I heard them. Diane's laugh first, the social one, pitched to Carrie. Then Margot's voice, lower, agreeing with something. Then Patty, whose contribution to any conversation was a supporting sound effect. Diane came through the wisteria in a cream-colored dress that cost more than my rent. Highlighted hair, heels that would sink in the garden soil, a clutch purse she held against her hip. Margot flanked her left in a blue wrap dress. Patty flanked her right in something floral. The formation. Diane was mid-sentence. Connor found this cute little venue, I don't even know where it is, but he was so excited about it, I didn't want to. She stopped walking. The stone terraces fell away below her, descending the hillside in clean lines. The specimen trees rose above, canopies layered against the evening sky. The living wall stood at the top of the garden, 30 yards ahead, its ferns and jasmine catching the last direct sun. The waterfall moved over, reclaimed church stone to her right, water flashing gold. The scent of jasmine carried on still air, heavy and sweet, the kind of smell that comes from years of patient cultivation. Her step hesitated, a fraction of a second. Then she recovered, chin lifting, smile adjusting. Margot saw the plaque first. I watched from the bar. Margot's eyes moved across the bronze letters, left to right, the way you read a sentence you don't expect. Her mouth stayed closed, no comment, no amplification. Diane's gaze followed Margot's to the boulder, the bronze, designed and built by Wesley Tiernan. The county deed framed beside it, her name on neither. Her smile didn't drop, it locked. The muscles around her mouth held the expression in place the way mortar holds stone, rigid and set. Her hand shifted on the clutch purse. Her other hand found the stem of the wineglass. Someone had already pressed into her grip, Sancerre from the bar, and her fingers tightened around it. Hattie looked at the garden, looked at Diane, looked at her phone, started scrolling, looking for something familiar in a landscape she couldn't process. They moved down the path. Diane's heels clicked on the flagstone, sharp sounds against the ambient water. She didn't comment on the plantings, didn't ask about the trees, didn't touch the wisteria petals that brushed her shoulder as she passed under the arbor. Dinner settled the guests into their chairs. Plates passed, wine poured. The waterfall filled the pauses between conversations. From my seat near the east terrace, I could see the full length of the garden in the falling light. The string lights had come on, warm points of gold in the tree canopy. The living wall had shifted from sunlit green to something deeper, the uplighting catching the fern fronds from below. Margot stood up. She held her glass in both hands, the way people do when they're about to say something they've rehearsed. Her eyes swept the tables. She smiled at Connor and Lily, then wider, to the room. "I want to say a few words about my sister," Margot said. "About the woman who carried her family through everything, through all of it. Diane, you were always the strong one. You held it together when nobody else could. And tonight, seeing your son this happy, I think we can all agree that everything you sacrificed was worth it." She raised her glass. The guests raised theirs. Polite applause. Connor's face was still. Lily's hand rested on his arm. Diane stood. She had the floor, and she knew it. The smile was back, warmer now, fueled by Margot's words and the Sancerre and the muscle memory of 1,000 social performances. "Thank you, Margot," she said, "and thank you all for being here. When I think about Connor growing up, I think about all the things I tried to give him. Stability, a real home, someone who showed up every day, not just when it was convenient." She paused. "Let the implications settle. I'm so proud of the man he's become." Nobody moved. A fork clinked against a plate at the far table. Karen looked at her plate. The silence of 30 people sitting in a garden built by the man she'd just dismissed, walking paths he'd laid by hand, eating dinner beside a waterfall he'd plumbed with his best friend on weekends. Diane sat down. Her grip on the wineglass hadn't loosened. Renee Okafor stood from her chair at the far table. She wore a charcoal blazer over a white blouse, her graying hair pulled back, reading glasses on a chain around her neck. She moved to the cleared area near the living wall with the unhurried authority of someone who had addressed university auditoriums for 30 years. She carried a flat case in one hand and a folded paper in the other. "Good evening," she said, her voice carried without effort. "My name is Renee Okafor. I'm the president of the Virginia Botanical Preservation Society." The tables went quiet. Not the polite quiet of a toast. The attentive quiet of people recognizing a title that meant something. "I'm here tonight at Connor's invitation, which I accepted with great pleasure, because this garden is a place our society has been watching with considerable interest for several years." She opened the flat case. Inside, a crystal award on a black velvet base. Beside it, a certificate with gold lettering. The Preservation Excellence Award is given to individuals whose work represents the highest standard of sustainable landscape design in our state. This year, the award goes to Wesley Tiernan. She turned to me. "I stood because standing was what you did." Wesley's garden is one of the most accomplished private landscape installations in the Mid-Atlantic region, Renee said. She didn't read from notes. The water management system alone would merit professional recognition. The living wall behind me is, in our assessment, one of the finest vertical garden installations in the state. The specimen collection spans 3 continents and demonstrates a level of sourcing knowledge that many institutional gardens cannot match. She paused, looked at the guests. Wesley designed and built every element himself with the help of a small group of friends over 6 years. This is not a commissioned landscape. This is a personal vision, executed with patience and skill that our board considers to be of institutional significance. She held out the crystal trophy and the certificate. I walked to her and took them. The crystal was heavier than it looked. The certificate had my name in gold letters above the society's seal. "Thank you," I said. That was all. Renee nodded. The guests applauded, not the polite applause from Margot's toast. Something with weight behind it. The sound of 30 people arriving at the same number. I carried the award back to my seat, set it on the table beside my water glass. Phil stood at the back of the crowd, near the stone wall by the waterfall, a beer in his right hand. He raised it once, held it, his eyes on mine. 6 years. Every weekend. Every trench he dug, every pipe he fitted, every beer he drank on my apartment floor while I sketched drainage plans at the drafting table. He'd known from the beginning, he'd waited for this. I raised my water glass. An inch, held it, Phil drank, set the bottle on the stone wall, put his hands in his pockets. Connor sat 3 tables away with Lily's hand on his forearm. His eyes moved between me and the crystal trophy on the table. He didn't smile, he didn't need to. His face held the expression of a man standing inside a decision he'd made, watching it prove itself right. The party continued. Conversations resumed. Guests walked the paths again, but different now. The questions had changed. Not who designed this, but how did he do it, and how long did each terrace take, and can I hire him? Diane stood near the wisteria arbor with her Sancerre. Margot had moved to the bar. Diane's knuckles were white around the glass stem. Her smile had not moved in 40 minutes. The cream dress, the highlighted hair, the performance she'd built her life around, all of it standing in the middle of 3 acres that said everything she'd spent 6 years denying. She didn't approach me. I didn't look at her. The party went on. The string lights burned warm against the dark sky, and the waterfall kept its rhythm, and people moved through the garden with a different kind of attention now. A man named David, whose wife played tennis with Margot, found me near the south terrace. He'd been at 3 of Diane's dinner parties over the years. We'd never spoken directly. The living wall, he said. How do you keep the root systems from competing at that density? Graduated soil depth. The ferns sit in 4 inches of substrate. The jasmine roots go 18 inches deep into pockets behind the armature. They're not competing. They're occupying different layers. He looked at the wall behind me. His wife stood 10 feet away, listening. You do residential work? He asked. I do. I pulled a card from my back pocket. Small. Cream stock. My name, phone number, and the words landscape, architecture, and design. David took the card and studied it the way people study things they plan to keep. I've got a half-acre lot with a drainage problem and no idea what to do with the slope behind the house. Call me Monday. I'll come take a look. He nodded and moved back to his wife. They spoke in low voices. She glanced at me, then at the garden, then at the card in his hand. Karen found me next. She'd brought her husband, a man I'd met once at a block party 6 years ago. He shook my hand and held it a beat too long, the way people do when they're apologizing for something they can't say out loud. The Japanese maple, Karen said. Connor told us it came from a parking garage. A crack in the concrete. Richmond, 8 years ago. 2-foot sapling wrapped around rebar. Her husband looked up at the canopy. 30 feet above us, the branches spread wide against the string lights. Every branch threw a shadow on the stone below. How do you even transplant something like that? He asked, slowly. You cut the rebar, keep the root ball intact, amend the soil for 6 months before you plant. Then you wait. A woman named Susan, who'd been at our wedding and sent a card when we divorced, asked about the waterfall's recirculation system. I explained the gravity feed, the holding tank, the catch basin. She listened the way people listen when they're building a story to tell later. 3 business cards left my pocket in 20 minutes. I answered every question the same way. Details, facts, measurements, and timelines. The irrigation system Phil designed. The stone Ray Gutierrez helped set. The armature Kemp welded. I named the people who helped me build what we were standing in. I did not mention Diane. I did not mention the divorce. I did not mention the narrative. I didn't need to. Patty Vickers stood near the portable bar with her phone in both hands, thumbs moving, head down. Nobody stood with her. Nobody approached. The woman who'd laughed at every joke, who'd fed every punchline back to Diane like a cue card, stood alone at the edge of the party with the blue light of her screen reflected in her glasses. Margot stood near the waterfall, talking to a neighbor whose name I didn't know. She held a glass of red wine instead of Sancerre. She laughed at something the neighbor said, and the laugh was different from the one she used when flanking Diane. Smaller, less rehearsed. She stood 20 feet from her sister. The distance looked deliberate. Diane moved through a group of 3 guests near the wisteria arbor. I heard her voice carry across the terrace, pitched at the register she used when she was recalibrating. It really is a nice little hobby, she said, the practiced laugh, the head tilt. Wesley always did like getting his hands dirty. One of the 3 guests, a woman I didn't recognize, looked past Diane to the crystal trophy sitting on my dinner table. The certificate with gold lettering, the Botanical Society seal. A hobby? The woman said. The word came back like a serve returned to the wrong side of the court. Diane's smile held. Well, you know what I mean. He's always been good with his hands. The woman looked at the living wall, 24 feet of steel and fern and jasmine, uplighting, catching every leaf. She looked back at Diane and said nothing. The silence said enough. 10 minutes later, Diane tried again. She'd moved to a different group, two couples standing near the specimen maple. Her posture had shifted, shoulders back, chin higher. The warm smile, the one that didn't move past her mouth. I always encouraged his creative side, she said. When we were married, I was the one who told him he should do something with his talent. I supported that. One of the men in the group had been at Margot's barbecue. I knew because Phil had pointed him out when we arrived, the guy with the golf shirt who'd smiled when Diane told me everything I touched dies. He stood with his beer halfway to his mouth, eyes moving from Diane to the garden to Diane again. The contradiction was written on his face. He'd heard her that afternoon in Margot's backyard. He was standing in the answer now. He took a step back from the group. Not a dramatic exit. Just a half step. His wife followed. They drifted toward the waterfall without excusing themselves. Diane's smile held. The muscles in her jaw tightened. A neighbor who'd been at the barbecue, a woman named Paula, looked at Diane the way you look at a retaining wall after the first hard rain, checking for cracks. Not confrontation. The quiet withdrawal of something that had been given without being earned. 20 minutes before the evening ended, Diane found Connor near the wisteria arbor. I was 30 feet away, talking to Renee about a drainage technique I'd adapted from a public park in Charlottesville, but I could see them from where I stood. Diane's hand found Connor's arm. She leaned close. Her eyes were wet, not crying. The preliminary stage, the version of tears that could escalate or retreat depending on the response. "You could have told me," she said. Her voice carried just enough to reach me. The tremble in it was real. The timing was not. "About the garden, your father's little project." "I'm your mother, Connor. You could have told me." Connor's arm didn't pull away. But it didn't soften either. "I wanted you to see it for yourself," he said. "See what? That your father built a garden? I'm happy for him. But to blindside me like this in front of everyone at your engagement party," she was building the frame. The excluded mother, the parent who wasn't told, the victim of her own son's secrecy. I'd watched her construct these frames for 15 years. The raw materials were always the same: a grievance, a witness, and tears calibrated to the audience. Connor looked at her. His posture was his own. Not mine, not hers, something new. "The way everyone else did," he said. Diane blinked, her mouth opened. She'd expected guilt. She'd expected the apology that always came when she turned the tears on, the retreat into compliance that Connor had given her since he was old enough to know what she wanted to hear. Connor didn't retreat. "I didn't keep this from you, Mom. I invited you. You're here. You're seeing what everyone else is seeing." Her hand dropped from his arm. She stood with both hands at her sides, the Sancerre glass in her right, the clutch purse in her left. The tears didn't escalate. They had nowhere to go. Connor walked back to Lily, who stood near the dessert table with a glass of water, watching. She put her hand on his back. He exhaled. I turned back to Renee. She'd been studying the wisteria arbor behind me, giving me the privacy of pretended distraction. "The Charlottesville drainage," she said. "You were saying the French drain angles, 30 degrees off the standard. Better flow on a southeast grade." We talked about drainage angles for 5 minutes. Behind us, the party continued its quiet restructuring. Patty left at 9:15. I didn't see her go. I noticed her absence the way you notice a sound that stops. One moment, the phone light was at the bar. The next, it wasn't. No goodbye, no wave. She'd come for the performance, and there was no performance left. 3 guests who'd sat in Diane's section at the barbecue now stood on the far side of the garden near the monkey puzzle tree, talking about property values and irrigation costs. They didn't look toward the wisteria arbor where Diane stood. Near 10, the crowd thinned. Guests drifted toward the pergola in pairs, stopping to look at the bronze plaque one more time on their way out. Several paused at the boulder with their phones, taking photos, recording the name. I found the railroad tie bench at the base of the living wall and sat down. The uplighting made the ferns glow above me. The green was deep now, almost blue in the evening air. Water moved through the drip lines behind the armature, the same slow clock sound I'd heard 1,000 times. Connor sat down beside me. We didn't speak for a while. The living wall breathed above us, jasmine releasing its scent into the cooling air. Somewhere behind us, the waterfall moved over its stones. A cricket started in the lower beds. The stone bench held the day's warmth against my back. "I owe you an apology," Connor said. I waited. "Not a general one," he said. "A specific one." He looked at his hands. Clean nails, no soil. The dinners I canceled. I picked excuses because showing up felt hard and not showing up felt easier. He paused. "Your graduation from Virginia Tech," I said. I sat 3 rows back. "I know. I saw you," he swallowed. "And I waved like you were someone I recognized from a class I dropped." The living wall ticked. Water through the drip lines. Measured. Patient. "The barbecue," he said. Mom said what she said. And I sat 6 feet away with a fork in my hand, and I didn't say a word. You were 23. I was old enough. I looked at my son, the jawline that matched mine, the shoulders that had filled out since college, the expression of a man who'd done the math and didn't like the sum. I put my hand on his shoulder, the same way Phil had gripped mine at the barbecue fence. One firm press. Contact that carried weight. "You're here now," I said. "That's the only timeline that matters." Connor's jaw worked. He looked at the ferns above us, green and gold in the uplighting, alive and growing in soil I'd mixed by hand in a wheelbarrow 3 years ago. He didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. We sat on the railroad tie bench, watching the garden settle into its nighttime rhythms. The string lights swayed in a breeze that carried the smell of jasmine and turned earth and the last of the evening's warmth. Across the terrace, 40 feet away, Diane stood alone. Margot was at the bar, her back turned, talking to the bartender about nothing. Hattie had been gone for 30 minutes. The 3 couples who'd orbited Diane all evening had migrated to the lower paths or left through the pergola. Nobody stood beside her. Nobody held her drink. Nobody waited for the next line. She held the Sancerre glass with both hands now. The cream dress caught the string light. Her highlighted hair was perfect. Her posture was perfect. But the audience had walked away, and the garden remained, and the bronze letters on the boulder by the entrance still said what they said. She looked across the terrace at her son sitting beside the man she'd spent 6 years erasing. I didn't need to. "If you're still with me, hit like and tell me, how would you rate my revenge from 1 to 10, and why?" 8 months after the party, I stopped counting referrals. The number didn't matter. What mattered was the work. David called the Monday after the engagement dinner. His half-acre lot had a drainage problem and a slope he'd been ignoring for 3 years. I drove out, walked the grade, took soil samples, and sketched a preliminary design in his driveway while his wife brought me coffee in a mug that said, "World's okayest golfer." He signed the contract that week. His neighbor called the following Tuesday about a retaining wall. The neighbor's brother-in-law had a courtyard in Charlottesville that needed a complete redesign. A handful of cards at the party. 11 clients by spring. The consulting practice tripled without a single advertisement. Every project came from someone who'd walked the paths, touched the stone, stood under the maple, and looked up. Connor and Lily started coming on Sundays. The first visit, Connor showed up in his clean white sneakers again. By the third week, he'd bought boots. Not expensive ones. The kind you buy when you know they're going to get dirty and you don't care. I gave him a notebook. Fresh. Unlined. Same brand I'd been using since the community gardens. He opened it at the potting bench, held a pencil the way engineers hold pencils, precise, vertical, too much pressure. "Looser," I said. "You're drawing a leaf, not a load-bearing wall." He laughed. A real one. He wasn't good. His hostas looked like deflated balloons. His maples weren't much better. But he came back every Sunday, sat on the stone wall near the east beds, and tried again. Lily would read on the railroad tie bench or walk the paths photographing the stone joints and leaf patterns. Some afternoons, the three of us worked the beds together without talking, just hands in soil and the sound of the waterfall doing what it always did. Margot called in June, a Wednesday evening. I was cleaning brushes at the workshop sink. "Wesley," her voice was tight, rehearsed. "I owe you an apology." "Bah. Okay, for the things I said, the things I repeated. I should have asked. Instead of just," she trailed off. "I appreciate you calling, Margot." A pause. "That's it?" "That's it," she hung up. I set the phone on the workbench and stood there for a moment. Then I finished cleaning the brushes and went back to the drafting table. Diane said nothing. No call, no letter, no message through Connor. 8 months of silence from a woman who'd spent 6 years making sure everyone heard her version. Whatever I might have wanted from her had run out somewhere around Notebook 15. In a winter when the garden was bare and the work was all underground, invisible, waiting for spring to prove it happened. I sat on the railroad tie bench at dusk with Notebook 18 open on my knee. The living wall glowed above me, green deepening toward black in the fading light. The wisteria hung from the arbor 20 yards to my left, past its peak bloom now but still full. Still the most patient thing I'd ever grown. I sketched the vine's main trunk where it wrapped the cedar post. 4 pencil strokes for the bark. A wash of purple for the last clusters. The brush still damp from the jar balanced on the bench beside me. The field watch ticked on my wrist. Crickets started in the lower beds. Water moved through the recirculation system. The same sound it made every evening, steady and indifferent to whoever was listening. The garden negotiated its own terms with the soil and the rain. So did I.